Okay, to continue, we're now on Module 4, and we're extending our discussion about treaties. And please understand, this may be a little bit tedious for some people, but it's really important that you understand the law and the logic of treaties and what's behind it, okay? I was asked the question before, to continue on. Under a capitalist system, such as ours, property rights, okay, the basis of property rights are either allodial title, comes from original discovery, or I have purchased lawfully, or I have been willed, bequeathed lawfully, or I have been gifted lawfully, lawful property, okay? But it requires lawful title. I don't get to keep stolen property even if I innocently acquired it, okay? Even if I'm totally innocent. And you can imagine how you would feel in that situation yourself. You know? Imagine, for example, your grandfather's watch, okay? Extremely rare, okay? Is it one of your most prized possessions, let's say, and it's been stolen from your house. And 20 years later, let's say, you're walking by a pawn shop. By the way, you filed a police report and everything else, and you're walking by a pawn shop, and here's your grandfather's watch. You go into the pawn shop, you say, this watch was stolen from me 20 years ago, okay? I can prove it was my grandfather's. There's his name right there. There's my grandmother's name right there. Does the pawn owner get to keep it? Possibly. But if you could, for example, show very clear that it was your grandfather's watch, guess what? Even after 20 years, he doesn't get to sell it. Police will come in and seize it and return it to you. That's how it works. And also you asked me about abandonment. Also just war, but just war means somebody else started it. It means you are the victim of war, not the aggressor, okay? And finally, you ask about abandonment. That's called adverse possession. And what that means is somebody who's had property, titled property, that's potentially interfering with the property rights of others, or perhaps not even, but they haven't done anything with it or made any claims to it or used it in any way. And that requires a legal action to say that they've given up title and use of a portion of the land because they haven't done anything with it for X number of years. And they're holding that property also adversely affects the property rights of someone else. That's important in adverse possession, you see? But it has to be through a legal process, okay? So here we are now. Here we are. Treaties are covenants between nations, but just a minute. What about citizenship? One of the arguments you will see made is that Indians abrogated their own treaties because Indians were made American citizens. In 1924, ratified 1928, called the American Indian, not Native American, American Indian Citizenship Act. Why? American Indians were subject to the draft during World War I, but even when they're not American citizens. What happened was, after World War I, the French, the United States, and the British wanted to put the Germans and the Turks on trial for war crimes, specifically crimes against the Hague Convention, which existed at the time. In the US Congress, there was a debate. Ward Churchill has some of the transcripts in some of his books, Indians Are Us, and some others. And what happened was, in the Congress, they said, just a minute. what about what we've done to Indians and to black people? If we charge the Germans and Turks with war crimes, what's to say they're not going to come back on us for what we've done to Indians and blacks and others? And so the answer was, let's make American Indians American citizens. Why? Because up to this point, even up to the point of Nuremberg, what nations did to their own citizens was not a matter of international law. It was a matter of sovereignty. In fact, that's the same argument the Nazis made at the Wannsee Conference, January 20th, 1942, when they planned the final solution for Jews. What we do to our Jews is our own sovereign business. What we do to our Sinti Roma, what some people call gypsies, is our sovereign business. And in fact, that's the way it was regarded. International law was regarded up to that point. So what happened was, American Indians, with no consultation, with no referendum, with no consultation, were summarily declared American citizens in 1924 and ratified in 1928. In Canada's case, by the way, it was 1963. In Canada's case, Canadian Indians were declared Canadian citizens in 1963 for the exact same reasons. What we do to our Indians, in the case of Canada, it's First Nations, which is interesting. First Nations, recognizing that we're nations. What we do to our First Nations people is our own sovereign business. And so, the Citizenship Act was declared American Indians were American citizens. Which means what? Does that mean that they don't exist as a nation anymore? We've already discussed that. What makes a nation is objective facts on the ground and law. Not whether someone wishes it, not whether someone declares you're no longer a nation, not whether someone declares you're now a citizenship. We're transferring you from one nation to another nation. That's genocide, by the way. Just so you know, we're going to talk about that too. We're going to talk about what that word genocide really means in law. Okay, not just in the common usage, but in law. Okay? So do you see the point now? The point is, one of the arguments that's made is, well, these treaties don't mean anything because the nation no longer exists, and the citizens of that nation no longer exist because they are now what? They are now American citizens, and therefore, you see, one of the ways to destroy a treaty, right, is if there are no more ancestors to those who signed the treaty in the first place. One of the ways to break a treaty between the U.S. government and the Lakota Nation is if there's no more Lakota Nation. If there are no more Lakota people who call themselves Lakota people, you see. And one of the things we're going to be arguing, and we're going to be showing you, is that when you wind up in court and you're asked, are you an American citizen? Go ahead.
Not just if there's no more Lakota people, but also if nobody's calling themselves American Indian, which the treaties refer to.
Correct.
If they're all calling themselves Native American,
right,
there is no American Indian.
Correct. Not one treaty, not one, says United States government and Native Americans. Not one. There is no Bureau of Native American Affairs. It's Bureau of Indian Affairs. There's no Department of Native Canadian Affairs. Okay? It's called the DIA, Department of Indian Affairs. The word Indian, we can talk about that, where that word came from too, because there's a bunch of myths about that. About Columbus thought he hit India and so on. Well, we can talk about that later. But the point is, you're exactly right. Words mean things, because words have legal meaning. And so if somebody starts saying, I'm a Native American, and first of all, even that term is offensive. Okay? The term is offensive because it implies that the further back your ancestors go in American history, the more real American you are. Well, we don't believe that. Okay? American Indians do not believe in nativism in the sense that somehow, your genetic lineage is somehow evidence of how real that you are. as an American or an Indian or whatever. We're not into that kind of stuff, okay? So we don't accept this notion of Native American because our ancestors came back. We use the same term, and that's why we urge people, if you're asked, are you an American? It's a trap. It's a trap. And we're asking people, and we're going to show you in this series, that your answer to that question is, I'm Gota, I'm Blackfoot, I'm Ponca, okay? I'm Cheyenne, Northern Cheyenne, I am Mohawk, whatever you are, whatever nation you're from, that's how you answer the question. And then the other thing you have is in your hands, you have a copy of your treaty and know it very, very well, okay? We're going to get into all, this is practical, we're not just doing history here. I told you we're not a bunch of whining, ranting Indians, okay? We're proposing to bring concrete logic, reason, and facts, and evidence, and law to you so that you can see what's being done in your name as an American. And in fact, really where your property rights, if any, really lie. Because guess what? Just like the pawnbroker can feel bad that he bought stolen goods. And maybe even did due diligence to try to make sure they weren't stolen, maybe, who knows. But when you show up 20 years later, and that's your grandfather's watch, it's got your grandfather's name and your grandmother's name on it with love, it was reported, there was witnesses that it was your watch, guess what? The pawnbroker doesn't get to keep it and sell it. Doesn't even get to sell it back to you. What you need to do is go down to the cops, produce the original title, right, the original ownership, and demand return of stolen property. And that's what we're going to be talking about here, okay? How does all this tie in? Because remember, when we have treaties, treaties have terms. The terms have to be kept. And they go into the future. They're binding. The terms are binding both parties into the future. That means what? Both parties have to remain viable as nations with the capabilities of what? Of keeping their respective terms of their treaty. That's what it means. And anytime you have a treaty, the terms of which is the abolition of one of them by the other, and absorption of one of them into the other, then you have a treaty that violates itself in its own terms. You have a treaty that violates the basic canons of treaty construction and basic logic. Basic logic. How can I sign to keep myself and those I represent bound to the terms of a treaty, and yet you take away my authority and my capabilities, my capacities, my system of governance that are required for me to specifically keep those terms? It doesn't make any sense, does it? We're going to finish now. This will be Module 4. And I thank you, Vach. We hope we've brought some useful information to you. Please keep tuned, and we will have more from the STT-PML Collective.